Good morning from Washington. I'm Brian Maguire. Welcome to this Euractiv event on EU-US trade. What does the future hold? Our program today is supported by VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Association. You can tweet using EA Debates, hashtag EA Debates, and you can send your questions using the Slido on the side as well. We'll come to that in just a moment. With elections on both sides of the Atlantic, 2024 has brought many changes to transatlantic relations. And if the results of this new leadership contest here in the United States changes priorities and strategies will shift as well. Launched in 2021, the Trade and Technology Council, TTC, aims to revitalize transatlantic cooperation through coordinated approaches to key global trade, economic and technology issues. And both regions have strong incentives to collaborate, but the specifics will depend on the outcomes of this next election and the policies adopted by the new or continuing leadership. Our discussion today is going to look at this issue, the role of China in all this mix as well, what it means for manufacturing, how the energy side will play into this as well. We have audience questions throughout the discussion today, so please don't wait until the very end. We have an excellent panel with us today, and we're starting with Bernd Lang, member of the European Parliament, chair of the Intercommittee, and we also have Matthias Jorgensen, head of unit US and Canada, DG Trade, the European Commission. Tiffany Smith joins us as Vice President for Global Trade Policy at the National Foreign Trade Council. Renata Zile as researcher at ECIPE, and Bertram Kalath is president of the VDMA. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We have a huge discussion today. Here in the United States, we have endless pursuit of the Pennsylvania vote. Everything seems to be hinging on that. We'll talk a little bit about these things later on. We're joined from across Europe in different places, and we're very grateful to have you. We're going to ask each of the speakers to start with a 60-second elevator pitch, just outline their key message, and then we'll get straight into the discussion. Bernd, can I start with you? 60 seconds.
We have to see quite clearly that the United States, both parties, left the Washington consensus. It's a little bit the irony of history that the Washington consensus is killed by Washington. They are focusing more on domestic policy, on, I call it, homeland economy. And this has consequences for the relation to European Union. Of course, it's quite moderate with the Biden-Harris administration. I expect the same path after the election, but we have still conflicts on the steel tariffs and other issues as well. And regarding Donald Trump, on his interview 2 days ago in Chicago, it's totally clear he will play with tariffs in a much broader way. So we expect to have serious conflicts in the future regarding our trade and economic relations.
Bernd, thank you. And Matthias, can I go to you now? 60 seconds?
60 seconds, here we go. Yeah, right. This is a really big and important trade relationship. It's really the most important in the world. It's 1.5 trillion euros a year, bilateral investment relationship of over 5 trillion US dollars or euros. We have, of course, therefore enormous possibilities, but we also have the risk of conflicts. We need to work to avoid these conflicts. We need to manage possible existing ones. We're looking forward to do that with the next administration in the US, whatever color that is. And as you said, you mentioned the Trade and Technology Council, and we believe that we should build on the experiences, build on the achievements of the Trade and Technology Council to meet the new challenges that we have. We need to tailor it, we need to change it, we need to update it, but we think we have something strong there. So we look forward to continuing to strengthen our trade relationship with the US. It's an important part of the overall political, strategic, and economic relations that we have with the US, and which is as important as ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Tiffany Smith.
Thank you very much. I very much agree. I think along the same lines as both of our earlier speakers. At the National Foreign Trade Council, we have dedicated a lot of this year to election planning to try to position the organization to be off and running in 2025. To a certain extent, this has been much easier to do this election, in part because as a candidate, former President Trump is so transparent and clear about what he wants to do on trade issues. And we also have the experience of a first term. And in a Harris administration, I think there is an expectation that many of the policies from the Biden administration, and certainly at a high level, the priorities are likely to continue. I think in either administration, we would say and expect that trade policy is going to be driven by a focus on competition with China and the greater use of industrial policy to boost domestic production, which means at least some degree of continued and potentially expanded tariffs. I think the thing to keep in mind is that big picture on what should be U.S. priorities. There is actually very little daylight between the two parties and also with our Congress. So we are expecting there will be challenges. How quickly and how intense will depend on who is in the White House. But I do think the lessons learned from the IRA is that neither party is really immune from creating trade controversies. We do think there will also be opportunities. And that business really will need to be driving governments. But mainly what we're hoping to see in the next administration is stronger and more restored U.S. economic leadership from either administration. National Foreign Trade Council released polling data last month that showed that large bipartisan majorities of American voters want the U.S. to play a larger global leadership role, particularly on technology and innovation, and fear the U.S. is falling behind China. So I think a technology and innovation agenda that restores U.S. leadership through organizations like the TTC and through maybe new opportunities would be popular. It would be popular with Democrats, Republicans, independents, and hopefully with our friends in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. We're going to come back to something in just a moment. Renata.
Yes, hi. Hi, good afternoon to those in Brussels and good morning in America. My name is Renata Zilli. I'm a researcher at the European Center for International Political Economy, a think tank here in Brussels, and where we follow closely the latest developments in international trade policy. And as you know, the economy is one, if not the major concern of American voters in every election. And according to the latest Ipsos poll, Trump is the preferred candidate on the economy, despite serious warnings made by some specialists and international community who have argued that some of his proposals could have, and I quote, negative impact on the U.S. economy and the stabilizing effect on the whole world. And I will be focusing my remarks on the economic effects, which is something that I will cover later. And but international trade is part of the agenda and is one of the discussed controversial issues, not only because of the strident rhetoric, but because most of the economic measures that have been proposed haven't been really tested on a global scale beyond economic models. So we really don't know what would be the impact, for instance, on tariffs across the board on the US economy and to Europe and other allies and other partners. And another equally worrying element that would have major repercussions on the future of global trade is the trade policy instruments that will be used to enact all these new economic measures. So we know that there are going to be tensions. So we don't know. We know that the US is no longer willing to pursue a multilateral approach to solve many trade matters. So it seems that the trend will continue to a more policy fragmented environment or in a more focal type of bilateral relationships, partnerships, such as the TTC and other type of initiatives. But of course, we need to differentiate what is part of the campaign trail, what is policy and politics, which is something that I will cover lately. And I suggest to look at the effects of international trade in three different layers in what comes in the effects of macroeconomics, and which is, as I said, the potential impact on tariffs onto the rest of the world, because even though Trump has already mentioned and been transparent on which is the range of tariffs that will be applying, the Harris administration also has suggested that there could be also some strategic tariffs. So we need to consider that in terms of what will be the impact on global trade flows in terms of policy, as I said, which are going to be the policy instruments for that will shape the new trade relations. We have been listening in the campaign trail about something that Trump proposes as a reciprocal trade act, which is something an eye-on-eye tariffs. We haven't seen how that operates. And on the European side, we have the Commission has new policy instruments that it's also part of a new political environment in which the Commission has different tools now to act against some unfair trade practices. And the third layer is politics. So macroeconomic policy and politics, we need to differentiate them, and although they are interconnected.
Okay, perfect. We're going to come back to those for sure. Thank you. Bertram, over to you.
Hello, my name is Bertram Kavlat. I'm the newly elected president of VDMA. VDMA represents over 3,600 machinery and equipment manufacturers in Germany and in Europe. Our companies employ 3 million people in the 27 EU member states. We export almost 80% of our production. And since the pandemic, the US has emerged by far as our largest export market outside the EU for German machinery and equipment sector. Our export volume to the US reached almost 28 billion euros in 2023, representing 13.5% of our total export volume, far before China. The United States is also our largest foreign investment location and continues to attract new investment from our branch. VDMA estimates that our sector is responsible for at least 100,000 well-paid jobs on US soil, and that about 1/4 of our members operate a subsidiary company here, as does my own company. It is obvious then that preserving and deepening the cooperation between the EU and the United States is of critical importance to our industry. VDMA itself has expanded into the United States, having opened our first ever American office in Washington, D.C. in 2022 and a second office in Chicago in 2023. Looking at the last decade of developments in the United States, we see, unfortunately, a clear trend away from free trade and toward protectionism. This new flavor of American trade and economic policy is marked primarily by a robust new industrial policy, as well as a widening trade confrontation with China. We expect these trends to continue and expand in the future, regardless of who wins the election next month. It is clear that America does not want the role of guarantor of the WTO and the rules-based trading systems anymore, and we Europeans must learn to live with that. At the same time, the United States remain an open market and the world's largest economy, and our industry continues to succeed there, despite political shifts. Hence, we remain optimistic about the US marketplace. Nonetheless, we are clear-eyed regarding certain potential risks on the horizon, for example, the prospect of a universal baseline tariff. We have learned over the years that we cannot take the EU-US relationship for granted, and we must do everything we can do to support and deepen it. Thank you.
Bertram, thank you so much. Tiffany, I want to come back to you, do the big picture first, and then we'll kind of go more deep on some of these specific issues. I think a lot of Europeans don't get just how similar both parties are when it comes to trade and international relations. Defense industry, things like that, maybe slightly different. But the big picture, I was with Biden at the White House whenever he launched the Inflation Reduction Act. The big takeaway, the only words I really remember him saying that day were America first. And it's the words straight out of Donald Trump's mouth as well. And his emphasis could have been coming from GOP talking points as well. So America first. Europeans tend to look at the Democrats and go, they're more like us and more reasonable to a degree. And yet that's not the reality when it comes to exactly what the tariff policies look like, what investment policies look like as well. Would you agree?
I think that's right. We certainly see that from our perspective. It's very, very difficult if you just were to read certain quotes, in the news or in the press. And I were to ask you, who said it. Sometimes it would be really difficult to determine, whether it had come from someone in a current Biden administration or someone from Congress, from a Republican side, or the two sides have really come around on an agenda where they're very well aligned.
Thank you. And also, just when we look at how the politics of this plays out as well, there is a different dimension here too, which is stability of the rule of law as well. Do you have concerns that, while we're talking about trade policy and the dynamics of that, the actual ground politics here could shift substantially after the election with the Trump win, and that could really give us a completely different environment. How do you read that?
I think that the it's especially from a trade law perspective. I think that we wouldn't expect. I think we've seen it all before. I think there is a sense that if the rules get in your way, then they should be ignored, and I think that's true more or less from both sides.
Okay, thank you. Matthias, one of the things we hear in DC here from European embassies is that they don't have the depth of relationships with the Republican side that they have established over time with the Democrats. And, when we talk about the trade representative here as well, Vice President Dombrovski, Vestager, Borrell, they all have very strong working relationships here in DC. Does the Commission feel it has those working relationships when it comes to the Republican Party, or is this still a work in progress? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, we have a trade relation and we have a strong investment relation with the US. That is a constant, and we work with the representative of the US. Of course, over the last couple of years, we've constructed a strong set of dialogues, and we've had some good results with the US. I think we've managed to park some trade disputes. We've established a Trade and Technology Council, and there's been some real positive developments there. I think we've been able to avoid that disputes over the Inflation Reduction Act went off ramp, even though they're not solved yet, and there's discriminatory elements which still exist. Before that, we had also a very intense working relationship with the Trump administration and his team, and we will try to establish strong working relations with the team that comes in the interest of all the stakeholders on both sides of this. I think that's really important that we always remember that there are millions of people, there are millions of firms, there are millions of citizens on both sides which depend on stability, predictability in this trade relationship, and that is what our approach will always be: to protect, to nurture, and try to develop it.
Thank you. Bernd Lang, you're nodding your head there as well in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act. What can we learn from the process, the interaction between the US and EU when it came to the Inflation Reduction Act, and what does this tell us about how we can move forward with either administration in the future?
Of course, Matthias was quite diplomatic, but I guess the conflicts are still there. So even the Biden-Harris administration didn't withdraw the illegal steel tariffs. And also in the Inflation Reduction Act, we have a lot of discriminatory elements. And at WTO, we have the blockade of the dispute settlement mechanism. So there are conflicts regarding an open and fair trade. At the moment, we are a little bit calm because we want not to influence, in any case, the election on the 4th of November, that's for sure. But after that, we have to really discuss that we took our toolbox and use them to establish really a relation which is based on a level playing field. And this means, of course, that the question of illegal steel tariffs, where the European steel industry paid last year 345 million tariffs illegally because we were forced to do it. That this is a game which has to be stopped. And also on the Inflation Reduction Act, and listening to Trump yesterday evening or Tuesday evening, and he said, "I'm a tariff man," and tariff is the most important word of the world, that he will introduce in his economic logic also some additional tariffs on China mainly, of course, but also on products from Europe. He mentioned 20% on oil. So therefore, I guess the relation will be based on some dispute mechanism on our toolbox, and I guess regarding WTO as well. Nevertheless, and then I will support Matthias, we should use all our possible links to the United States to avoid such conflicts. So the TCC was a good exercise. Even we have not such a big result in concrete trade improvements, but some standards, some common practices on export controls regarding the plug for electric trucks. So perhaps we can reduce this on a more technical level, even with the possible Trump administration, but also with the Harris administration. So this showcase to have twice a year a ministerial meeting is perhaps not necessary, but really this dialogue is also important to have at least a knowledge on the strategy and on the measures we will faced with. On Trump 1, it was not really possible. I remember when I wanted to meet USTR, I had to make a secret meeting. So officially it was forbidden to talk to the European Parliament. So this we have to avoid, so that we have really even have different political strategies, and specifically in the economy, different approaches. We should try to avoid just having conflicts without dialogue in the interest of our really deep economic relation, and of course, politically and regarding security, deep relations as well.
Thank you. Bertram, let's bring us down to literally the nuts and bolts from your industry and what this means on the ground. Okay, so we have the tariff side of it, and Europeans are a little concerned about increases in tariffs, particularly under a Trump administration. How that would play out whenever the average American is desperately worried about inflation, I'm not sure. But for your industry, manufacturing sector, local content is a key issue for you. So, where is stuff made? And that's not going to change whether it's the Trump administration or the Harris administration. You're still going to have to deal with these America First elements of volume of content and where things are manufactured and ownership of that manufacturing plant as well. For example, China will not be able to manufacture in Mexico to skip around tariff regime. And European companies will have to invest more in manufacturing in America as well. So these kind of dynamics. Talk us through what this looks like for manufacturers, and do you see any real difference between potential Harris-Trump administration?
I mean, creating jobs is important for every government everywhere in the world. The same way for the EU governments as well as the United States government, any government. Our machinery and equipment manufacturer create value and create jobs by working in international networks. So tariffs will harm business, and tariffs, especially if you put high tariffs like base level tariffs on the United States, it will increase the price for the average consumer in the United States for every product that they buy, because producing everything in one country makes things more expensive. And there had been a few countries who tried to produce everything at home. We had one on German soil for 40 years. It is not a valid business model. And I know that the IRA had caused some friction when it started. We feel, especially in VDMA, that local content rules or tariffs are not good ways to strengthen the competitiveness of any production place, be it the United States or EU. And I feared personally that we would get into a subsidized race again, and this would harm businesses. In the end, we see IRA more an opportunity today, despite its local content rules, because European equipment manufacturers have products which you cannot buy in the United States, which will be bought like semiconductor fabs. They need equipment from Europe, which we can supply. And for me, it's an important sign for the reindustrialization in the United States, which is important and which also creates business for our members. And that is the same urge over both possible governments, being Republicans or Democrats.
Thank you. Renata, I'm going to come to you in a second. We have lots of questions coming in. I'm going to come to the questions in a moment. If you want to fire a few more through there, we'll take those in a hurry. Renata, the politics of this is not necessarily going to match the economics of this in terms of rationality. For example, when Trump was renegotiating with Mexico and Canada, he got largely what he wanted through brute force. And what matters, it seems, to Trump in particular, is getting a win, regardless of the long-term consequences of that. Now, you may or may not agree with that, but let's look at what tariff negotiations might look like as well, playing out the politics of this and the economics. If the 20% is going to be leveled and Europe wants to retaliate and get into some kind of subsidy or trade war with this as well, and Trump plays hardball, does Europe have the capacity to fight back or to manage this, or does it just have to comply and sort of absorb the cost?
Well, of course, any party can retaliate, right? The problem is not that, is what would it take and what would be the costs and for not just for the UN and US, but all the supply chains interconnected to those goods and products, because most of these tariffs, it's not clear yet if it's on final goods, intermediate goods, and how would that, like, that's part also of the political rhetoric, right? Because just 10%, 20% tariffs, we don't know, and this is why people are cautioning about an upward spiral on inflation, because if you tax an intermediate good, you will tax it again, and that will definitely rise prices. For consumers, exporters, we are not sure who is gonna pay the cost of it. So I agree that Trump wants wins, but I don't know what will it take in that process, because you were clearly pointing about Mexico, US, Canada trade agreement, and much of much of his now new proposals are in clear breach with what he previously agreed. So, which is why I tend to disagree in the sense that both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, respect the law to the same extent. That we will need to see if some of the things that we already discussed and agreed remain as part of, keep valid, or if we're going to have a different set of laws for every time or every administration, because that's what's been going on with in America, domestic politics, as a result of like how this translates to foreign policy, this changing course, which obviously affects trade relations, because of course, the biggest non-tariff barrier is uncertainty, and we're 2 weeks or 3 weeks ahead of the election, and we have been organized, like the world has been prepared for a second Trump administration, for a continuity of a Democrat-led administration. However, we might see another policy environment in which what we already agreed is no longer valid for the next 4 years. So that, of course, puts pressures of for businesses and consumers and all the rest of the world. So I think that's the state of play right now, and the politics, it gets messy because we cannot disentangle, at least at this point, what is actually going to be applied and what is part of the rhetoric. And last thing, what are going to be the tools to leverage? Because in what we saw in the case of Mexico is that we see different agendas overlapping on the one issue of migration, on the other issue of trade, and everything gets part of the same negotiation. So I don't know what's going to be part of the political bargain when it comes for any administration, the U.S. administration. Yes.
Okay. Best soundbite so far: the worst non-tariff barrier is uncertainty. I can go on a T-shirt as well. Okay, let's take some questions, and I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about China. So Roland Verstappen says, Trump said very high tariffs needed towards EU and China so they make more investments in the EU and the US. He gave the German case where no US cars are sold because basically Europe doesn't want trucks, but America wants BMWs and Mercedes. And very high tariffs on European cars. Mercedes would make cars in the US. So which other regions do the same as this? Do we have any other regions which play this game where we can look at how it plays out? Bertram? Who plays the tariff game? That's,
So first of all, any tariff tit for tat would would hurt both sides. In matters of cars, many of the German car manufacturers do have their production lines in the United States. They're one of the biggest employer in the United States, and maybe in a small way, the sales of Dodge Rams go up quite significantly in Germany. So maybe we solve that, as my member companies employ more than 100,000 people there. The issue is going local for local, like a car manufacturer or any other company, is for big companies. The majority of our 3,600 member companies is SMEs, companies of around 200 employees, like my own company, and that is also important for United States SMEs. We cannot go local for local. So tariffs between the EU and United States hurt SMEs way more than the big companies. So cars might not be a good example, because car manufacturers go local, and they had done so since quite a while. In the end, I repeat myself, tariffs make any product more expensive for the final consumers. And even if that might seem like a good disruptive step for any new government, for any new administration, in the end, and it's not a long term, even in the midterm, short term, it hurts consumers. So we must avoid them.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Bundle two questions together for you here. Robert Francis says, Matthias Jorgensen says, the TTC needs to be tailored and changed. What might these changes look like? And also, does he think the TTC will continue if Trump is elected? Some died here in DC about that. And just to add on to that as well, and if you could dream, what would your wish list look like for the TTC in the area of trade? Matthias.
Dream big or go home. Huh? That's what they say. I mean, I think we think there's a lot of scope for finding commercially meaningful results under the TTC bilaterally. We're both worried about our supply chains. We think we could collaborate very strongly on supply chains. We're worried about our supply chains towards third countries. Let's strengthen our supply chains across the Atlantic. And we're both faced with the challenges of climate change and the green transition. Let's build a clean transatlantic marketplace to help us in that transition and to make our firms more competitive. So I think there are a lot of positive things that we could propose to the US. I think we understand that Donald Trump wants wins. So do we. That's what we work for in the European Commission, to make wins for the EU, and that's something we work also very closely with, together with the European Parliament, and I think very successfully so, with Bernd Lange and other members, to make wins for the EU in global trade policy.
Okay, nice segue for that. Let's talk about wins and how you get them. Not an easy thing to do with the Trump administration necessarily. Not that it's easy under a potential Harris one, but you're dealing with different dynamics here. Tiffany, let's look at China for a second. China is the biggest threat to the United States and to Europe in many different areas. I asked someone this week in counterintelligence, what would happen at the Department of Defense if there was an insurrection here again as well. And he said, well, DOD's first priority wouldn't change. It would still be China, China, China. And in economic terms, it's the same thing here. Democrats and Republicans are lined up. How does Europe work with the United States to get wins, like Matthias says, and use China as the bridge across the Atlantic?
Thanks for that question. I think there are a few ways. On a more positive, outward-looking agenda, I don't see that there is appetite or bandwidth for anything like a more comprehensive U.S. Or EU type TTIP, or going back to TTIP, or a comprehensive trade agreement. But I do think that if the two sides look at things strategically from a commercial perspective, there are opportunities where we could do things together that would be meaningful from both a security perspective, a competition perspective, and a business perspective. There's and one idea to think about would be there's a bill called the Medical Supply Chain Resilience Act that has been introduced this year. And it is basically a mini trade promotion authority that would empower USTR to negotiate with like-minded allies who would agree to continue and to supply one another with medical supplies in the event of a future pandemic type situation. It really builds off of some of the lessons learned in the COVID-19 pandemic and would look to try to insulate from future pandemics by agreeing to things like not imposing export controls and streamlining some of the registration and regulatory procedures, some of the things that actually happened during COVID, but really trying to capture those lessons and put them on paper and have a small group of trusted trade partners who would line up and sign up to those provisions for the future. Tariff reduction could be part of that if necessary. So I think if we think strategically and creatively, there are opportunities. I also think that it's important not to get too caught up in the frustration and the sense of how can we work together in the face of what seems like a trade war. And I think from the business communities, I may have to do a little work with our governments to try to point them in a direction of seeing opportunity. I think some of the things Matthias suggested are really good. I think, from the TTC perspective, we have always wanted that to be a much more robust, commercially meaningful endeavor, and have been somewhat frustrated whether it's deepening the dialogue on areas where we do have conflict. And I'll just, as the only U.S. speaker here, I'll note that the U.S. is not the only party who has some discriminatory measures on its books. So I think there's an opportunity for having, in the absence of a WTO, we need to have a mechanism that we can use bilaterally to diffuse some of these trade disputes and try to talk about the differences and try to find solutions. And I do think also in areas like climate, like circular economy, there could be a number of things that we could do together.
Thank you, Bernd. One of the things, on the technology side, big tech is seen as being punished by Europe, and we just don't have big players in the market of equal weight. And our approach, Europeans' approach to taxation on this as well, is varied. How do you read this in terms, and also Germany is singled out by Trump and others as being a problem, even as separate from the European Union when it comes to manufacturing and cars in particular. How do you build relationships and find these wins, whether it's a medical side, for example, or whether it's as building relationships against a common adversary? How do you see this play out? Where can the wins come from?
Perhaps one more word on China. I guess we have also to make clear that we have different interests. So I guess at the moment in the United States we have from several parties the interest to protect the market from China products. So that's not our interest. We have still the clear perspective to have an open market, but under fair conditions. I guess we can work with the United States in some security issues together to avoid security risk coming from China, and also regarding human rights. So the ban of products based on forced labor, we have now a similar legislation in Europe as well, and the United States has for a long time. But on the question how to deal with Chinese products, we have a different approach. We have a huge toolbox, the anti-dumping, the anti-subsidies regulation, we have regulation regarding public procurement, and also how to deal with foreign subsidies in the internal market. So the clear target is to have a level playing field. And this is also relevant for the question of taxation or rules for big tech companies. It's not the aim to protect our market from them. No, we want to have a clear rule-based approach so that the fundamental rights like the protection of personal data are secured. And by the way, this was also a discussion between us and Trump 1. So he wants to really use trade measures to influence political decision inside the European Union. So he said, if we would establish digital tax on these small startups coming from Silicon Valley, then he would put tariffs on European cars. And this was really the reason why we established a new instrument, this anti-coercion instrument, to defend our economic interests if there is a coercive measure in trade and investment. So I guess also Google and Facebook have to recognize we have a clear interest in a fair competition. Therefore, we have the Digital Market Act. We want to secure also the consumers. We have the Digital Service Act and also the AI Act. This is not against companies. It is based on a rule-based system.
Okay, I just want to stay on this for a second, Bernd. We're not talking about, there are two possible outcomes in this US election, and we're focusing a lot on the Trump side of it because it's likely to be more problematic. But you talk about anti-coercive measures. How realistic is that kind of approach with a president who really doesn't care about a rules-based system and whose response to a lot of, if you don't do what I want, Europe, we don't have NATO anymore? Can Europe really push back? Can we really play that game, or do we just have to ride this out for 4 years where where Europe doesn't get what it wants and it has to swallow bitter pills just to continue to trade with the United States and keep the doors open? Do you think that's an unreasonable proposition, Bernd? And then we'll come to Renata.
Of course, this is the last resort, no doubt about. But if, once again, the reality will be the perspective we heard Tuesday evening, then we have, of course, use our toolbox and our measures. And also, we discussed a bit about Mexico. Also, Trump mentioned quite clearly that he wants to use tariffs and economic power for the question of migration. So even here, using trade and investment for political reason. And this is really not in line with our clear perspective. And then, yes, we will have a kind of escalation. And I'm quite sure that we have interest on both sides that at the end of the day really lead to negotiations. We had this also with this steel question where we, of course, had targeted countermeasures on Harley-Davidson, on brandy, and so on. And this led to negotiation. And this is, of course, the aim, to have negotiations and not to have a further escalation.
Thank you. Renata, then Bertram. Renata, just let's stay in China for a second as well. You're just been appointed the European trade rep and you're coming to DC. How do you negotiate a bridge across the Atlantic and use China and as a specific bit of leverage?
I guess that's the question for the century and for all countries engaged in trade at this moment, how to handle China, to what extent most of the dependencies on China. Europe, it's more dependent in many regards, more than the US. So of course, within the EU, we also are seeing divergences between which policies to apply towards China. So we also need to see how that will play. And I think, I don't know, I don't remember, I think Tiffany was saying that that's why it's important to use the alliance to expand the alliance to not just the EU, the US, but also with other like-minded partners, because the EU and the US have the same, basically the same problem with different scale, but same problem, which are, they need to be less dependent and in their critical dependencies, in rare earths, and then in materials and technology. So that the only way, well, not the only way, but one way to clearly do it is to to build more partnerships around these topics or areas of strategic interest. And I think that's one of the approaches that could lead us to a better, if not solution, a better state of play on how to deal negotiation or how to negotiate, engage with China, because as a coalition, it would be with a shared interest. It would be more, it will have more strength than each one going their own way, which is what we have seen in the past years.
Thank you. Bertram, you wanted to follow up there?
Yes, please. What Bernd Lange was describing is basically weaponized global interdependence. And we as an exporting industry suffer that tremendously. I'm happy that we have an anti-coercion instrument, but that might be a hammer too big. So we are looking for a more graduated, flexible response because that instrument might be too big for anybody to use it. But there are easy ways to get out of this. What are we looking for when dealing with China? We want to be more resilient. And we want to be less dependent because especially after the Russian war on Ukraine, we have seen how dangerous dependence can be. So we as VDMA are advocating since 2021 for mutual recognition agreement on conformity assessment. That could help because standard setting is a very important issue, and we would not like to see China set the standards for the world, which China is trying, and not only trying, doing at the moment. So we between the United States and the EU have a big chance of standard setting if we can mutually agree on conformity. There's an ECIPE paper that estimates the possible growth in machinery and electrical equipment that we could increase export by $75 billion just with an agreement like this. And we could thus strengthen resilience and have less dependency between these great market. And I think that is an important job for the TTC for the forthcoming year.
Thank you. We're going to focus a bit on the standards now and then competitiveness. Then we're going to take some more questions. So please send your questions in now for that as well. Let's focus on standards for a second. So Bertram, the standard side of this as well, essentially non-tariff barriers. And we don't have conformity authorities matching on the EU-US side, which get the job done quickly. And if we're not getting the job done quickly on both sides, you have lag time in terms of investment, return on investment. You have production cycles which are not flowing well enough as well. So it's not competitive, as competitive as it could be. And now we have Mario Draghi producing this doomsday report on competitiveness as well. Draw some of those things together for me, Bertram. You talk about the possibility to increase export. Can European companies offset some potential tariff losses by being more efficient? And if we get these conformity rules aligned?
The market is tight everywhere. I had Indian colleagues, and they used to tell me cost is effect and price is policy. So you have to be world champion in cost, and the European Union lost that. So first we have to strengthen the competitiveness of production in the EU, and then we can discuss about tariffs. To suffer 10% tariffs is very difficult at the moment. You have to see that on both sides of the Atlantic, companies have suffered corona, disrupted supply chains and everything. So, and remember me talking about SMEs mainly, there's not a lot of money and there's not a lot of margins. So tariffs would hurt. In terms of standard, this would especially make life easier for smaller companies. My own company is producing valves. We export 80%. And if you imagine a valve for a certain tube regulating water for the same pressure, for the same medium, for the same pipeline, in Europe, I use 8 thin screws to fix that valve in the pipe. In the United States, is 4 thick screws for the same valve. I cannot use the valve which works with 8 thin ones in the United States and vice versa. So a company like mine, 200 employees, we have a variety of 24 million different valves which we can produce. A typical valve we sell is like 12 pieces. I have to produce 2 different versions. and especially for SMEs. So mutual agreement on standards would be so much easier. We could export the same valve over there and vice versa. Everything I say for European companies goes for SMEs in the United States as well. So that would be a rather easy step to create more business between the partners.
Thank you, Renata. It's often forgotten that SMEs make up the vast majority of businesses, the backbone of European and American business as well, and yet we tend to focus on the big industries. It's if we take this competitiveness approach, and one of the recommendations in the Draghi report is to make the processes simpler to avoid over-regulating as well. I'll come back to Matthias in this in a second. How do you see, again, opportunities to work with the United States to get wins for SMEs when it comes to conformity and regulatory process like this?
Yeah, I agree that, well, in Europe we have that discussion now to what extent we have been over-regulating, and this has been in the detriment of SMEs. So I think now the question in the global environment, what I'm very concerned about establishing standards, we have seen that there's an increasing raise in the number of also industrial policies, subsidies that might not as well help might hamper the competitiveness on SMEs. So I think it's just not tackling just one issue, but as different issues at the same time. At the end, I believe that having a more robust dialogue, which between US and EU will definitely in strategic areas will definitely. These are the areas where we need to see an engagement of smaller players, and I think that's where you were asking at the beginning, and which areas, or what's the Santa Claus list for the TTC. We need to engage other type of partners, smaller partners between, of course, businesses from these two large partners, but other SMEs that are also engaged basically in the global supply network. And I think that's where a dialogue, a more constructive dialogue, should take place.
Thank you. Matthias, let's stick with the same theme here on conformity and regulation as well. Let's take it from the competitiveness side. And if we're facing tariffs or facing other obstructions, is the win that can be had here for European business based off the Draghi report? And we're looking at competitiveness, simplifying our processes, speeding things up in terms of financing as well. Is this how Europe can sort of meet a stronger competitor in the market going forward and do it quickly?
Brian, I don't think any country or any geographical entity in this world can be an island. And that certainly applies to the EU. The EU is the biggest importer and the biggest exporter in the world. We have an interest in being able to defend ourselves against unfair competition, but we also have an interest in expanding trade ties and maintaining a level playing field. Now, I think the key point from the Draghi report is that the best platform for engaging with the world on that is to increase our competitiveness, improve our internal market, capital union. I mean, there are lots of ways on that, and in that way, we'll be able to move forward and engage with third countries for a rules-based, for a open, and for a fair trade policy, with the kind of in the vein that we have pursued over a number of years, with a strong support from a broad coalition of member states, and with strong cross political support also in the European Parliament. And I think that's really a key issue, that there's strong political support to that trade policy. And I think that's a direction we need to go forward with. There are some problems with the trade rules today. They don't allow us, or even some of the WTO rules, they don't allow us to tackle some of the problems. That doesn't mean that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, just because there's some areas where WTO rules or the rules that we have don't work, we should just put aside completely the openness and the rules-based approach in general. But I agree with you, competitiveness, homework is really key, and that's what the Draghi report underlines. And that's for me the nexus between what is in the Draghi report on competitiveness and trade policy.
Okay, Bernd, then Tiffany. Bernd, just on the same thing, is there a concern? Are you concerned that tariffs become a big headline and competition within Europe gets second base, and the political dynamic is misdirected, that we need to get our own house in order to be able to compete with America, and yet we'll spend too much time complaining about an administration that has tax credits or tariffs applied which are unfair? Bernd, what do you think?
Of course, in the calculation to make a business running, of course, subsidies and tariffs are one part of the game. But the question of certainty, the perspective of having a good perspective for selling the products and having really the technology leadership is much more important. Look, we changed the guidelines for state aid to have a matching system compared to the Inflation Reduction Act. And until now, we have only one case. So you see, that's not the most important issue. And I guess also the question 10% tariffs is of course relevant, but the most important issue is to stabilize the innovation of companies. So there, the question of bureaucratic burden is an important issue. In average, we have 20% of the working time of a company in bureaucratic exercise and only 80% in the production process. This has to be changed. And the question of research and having also the network between different companies in the same supply chain, this is much more important. And there, I guess, we have to strengthen our efforts in the next years to have really this environment of innovation and stability, also regarding the possibility to sell the products.
Thank you. Tiffany, then we're going to take some questions. Tiffany, just on the competitiveness side of this as well, Bernd touches on innovation. You know, startups in Europe do well to the point when they want to scale up, they get their funding from America. Now we're looking at the capital union, how we simplify those processes. That's not something that's going to change in the short term as well. How do you see this interplay between United States and Europe in terms of startup and scale up, the innovation dynamics that are there as well? Does America just do this better?
Well, I think the evidence would show that up to now that's probably been the case, but I'm probably not the expert to explain why. But I do think that keeping our eye collectively on the ball on innovation is the key to winning the competitiveness battle, because frankly, governments often are operating from a perspective of looking backwards. And it's the innovators that are looking forwards and finding what that next thing is. And I think that, European companies, American companies, many are one and the same, and innovation has been a strength that we both have. And finding ways to do more collaboratively, or to find out why some of the startups are able to be more successful in the United States is a really worthy line of inquiry. We do a lot within NFTC with startups here, and what they talk to us about is how they're leveraging digital tools and opportunities to grow and scale their business, to find markets, to take advantage of new technologies. And I do want to get the one point that I've been trying to think about for a bit, which is, we talk a lot about tariffs. Tariffs end up on goods, but manufacturing today is also all about services and all about technology. And so focusing only on one side of that coin, I think is short-sighted, and we need to look at competitiveness of manufacturing and of building jobs and job creation as a holistic thing that includes both technology, services, and the manufacturing of the goods.
Thank you. Renata, you wanted to follow up there?
Yes, I want to say something quick and back to your point, Tiffany, on trading services. And I think we're in a different world now where apparently it's like a race of competitiveness and who does it better. It seems like, yeah, there's something wrong with someone doing it better. But I think we're shifting from a paradigm change. Like we're experiencing a paradigm change in which the underlying of trade is someone doing things a little bit better than you and exchange the benefits between yourself. And I think that's what's been missing as well from this discussion, and even in trading services, where Europe it has a lot of dependencies with trade with the US. And I think this is an area of potential cooperation. And as opposed with tariffs in trade, restrictions in trading services are not that visible and maybe not all very politically salient. But there's a lot of regulations that also need to be harmonized, and maybe we can see another wave or this boost of innovation that we've been waiting to see for the past years. We know that trade in services is the future, is where there is growth, and I don't think we need to go a little bit back and step back to the old world where we thought that also doing something better than you is not in detriment of you, but both partners can specialize in what they do best and find mutual exchanges in the process.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Tiffany. We're going to take questions and we'll come back to Bertram as well. Tiffany, the Republicans have a reputation for liking deregulation, not always in the long-term advantage to the United States or anywhere else. If you look at the mortgage crisis, for example. But if we're talking about moving forward quickly and deregulating and harmonizing as well, do you think that a Trump administration could actually be good for Europe in this regard?
I don't know. I think that I wouldn't expect a Trump administration to be typical necessarily. And I think really, if you're trying to sort what you might expect, I think you go with really following along of what, as a candidate, the former President Trump is saying he wants to do. Now, there has been some talk about increasing government efficiency, and so to the extent that materializes and it's in a constructive way, that is an area that I think there could be some progress that would be beneficial both here and in Europe.
Efficiency and Trump's efficiency may be two different things. I'm supposed to be in Philadelphia tonight with George Conway and a bunch of Republicans against Trump to talk about exactly those issues. Let's take a couple of questions from Matthias, then I'm going to come back to Bertram as well. Okay, so Pascal Koenig says, we understand there's a group within the Commission preparing for potential trade countermeasures for a Trump trade war. Do we know where the Commission is standing in that process?
I mean, we always try to take care of the relationships which are important, and when there are important changes, we try to prepare for them. Prévoir, c'est gouverner. Somebody French said that a couple of 100 years ago, and since it's in French, it can neither be Churchill, Oscar Wilde, nor Shakespeare. But that's so. Yeah, no. We are very interesting, as I said, in preparing thoroughly and well for what we hope will be a positive period for EU-US trade relations and investment relations, and we're working together on these issues in the Commission.
I wish I had your optimism. Okay, another question for you, Matthias, from Antonio Pilati. He says, as you mentioned, discriminatory elements remain in the IRA. Are the chances for the next Commission to reopen the dialogue with the US in order to soften IRA's Buy American provisions? Can the Commission soften these dimensions a little bit? Matthias, what do you think?
The IRA is, on the one hand, it was a positive step because it was the US taking a serious step in the area of climate change policy or combating climate change. On the other hand, there were some clearly discriminatory elements in that piece of legislation which goes against the WTO rules. I think that's pretty clear, and which is something that we have worked against when these kind of local content rules, which we have worked together against with the US when other countries have done it. Now, the US has sinned in that regard. We think that we need to try to remedy that. We could remedy that, for example, through concluding the critical minerals agreement that we've been trying to negotiate with the US. We hope to conclude that very, very, very soon. We hope so. That's a clear win. I don't think we'll be too far away from that. It would require political will, but we will continue to pursue EU interests in that area. Yeah.
Thank you. As an Irishman, it still disturbs me to see IRA listed on policy documents everywhere at the moment as well. Bertram, let's talk about SMEs and these elements that we just try to tie some of this together as well. Your best case scenario, what does that look like for Trump administration, Harris administration? What do you think European manufacturers, European SMEs in particular, need to go forward? What do you think is viable, but in the best case scenario, in the short term? By short term,
a good climate. A good climate for any SME or for any company is stability, because we supply long-term goods. And talking about regulations, we discussed now, I'm always under the impression that many members of the EU administration think that regulation creates competitive advantage. A recent survey among my members' companies showed that a vast majority describes regulations and the reports we have to do with the regulations as the biggest problems for their business, even before demography. Let's talk about CBAM reports, CSR reports, taxonomy, supply chain due diligence reports, AI regulation, etc. That costs a lot of money, and that hinders innovation. We made a survey about the cost of regulation and bureaucracy in our companies, and it showed that 1 to 3% of turnover are cost of bureaucracy. That is an annual profit, a typical annual profit. That is a typical annual R&D budget. And I remember visiting the United States in Washington. A member of Congress told me, "You Europeans, you regulate before you've got the technologies." And we develop the technologies and market them, and then we think about regulation. And our partners in the United States think that these regulations are protectionism, and our companies in the EU think it hinders their business. So I really do hope that the new Commission will put the axe to a lot of those regulations, because that might help our business. Thank you.
Bertram, just follow on that. Do you think this Commission, this Parliament has heard Mario Draghi and is prepared to act? Do you think the member states have heard Mario Draghi and will be prepared to act?
We have to. We have no time. We have no time. We have to act. I remember a similar report by Tajani from years ago, and nothing happened from that. We have a German report by the BDI, which goes in the same direction. There is no time to spare, because business is tough. Chinese competitors go into export into foreign markets. So no time to spare. Start now and get... Sorry.
Okay, no, Tajani never said whatever it takes, that's for sure. Okay, so we're coming close. We're coming close on time here. Bernd, from the Parliament side as well, what's the appetite for getting stuff done when it comes to improving competitiveness, supporting industry in competition with America in particular right now?
It's not just the competition with America, it's just also looking worldwide. We have challenges. The question of climate change is still there. The question of really improving the situation in the global south. So we have to look how to innovate our industry and also give possibilities for investment outside the European Union to stabilize this development. So if you're taking together European Union and the United States, we are covering about 1/3 of the global trade and global GDP. We have 2/3 outside these two regions, and we have to look to that as well. But it's totally clear that we have to improve the conditions for innovation inside the European Union to fulfill really these big challenges. And I'm convinced that we will not really table a lot of additional legislation in the future. We have really to look for the proper implementation, which is really benefiting companies and stimulate innovation. Secondly, we have to look for coherence. And yes, Bertrand mentioned some examples where we have to look. There is a lack in coherence in different legislation. And certainly also we need the necessary resources to certify some process, to have the proper custom authorities and so on. So it's more now to tune up the situation as it is instead of creating totally new elements in the future.
Thank you. We're going to go to final comments just a second, but I just want to get one final remark from Tiffany. Tiffany, Congress and European lawmakers, not just the European Parliament, it would be my view that the relationships are not well developed. How do you read it?
No, I think that's right. And I think one of the challenges that we have on our side is that, Congress does much less international travel really than it used to. There is this fear of being accused of being on a junket if you go anywhere.
Politicians ever afraid of that?
Looks too good. But they are a lot more insular than I think they were in the past. And so I think that's a challenge to get over. And, there are benefits to seeing people face to face. There are benefits to really getting to have those relationships and exchange views. And we certainly would want to see a lot stronger relationships between members of the legislative branches on both sides.
Bernard, you have a whole delegation just waiting for you right there. We're going to go to wrap up, and we are almost out of time. So 30 seconds each, and really 30 seconds in this. So your final soundbite on EU-US trade relations going forward. Renata, let's start with you. 30 seconds.
Yes, we also published a paper. Thanks for Bertrand for citing our paper on MRA expansion. And we also published a paper on how the EU has been trading less with the world. And I think this is a major concern, given the fact that much of the growth in the world is happening sometimes outside the European Union. And one reason there are many ways to improve competitiveness, which are domestic, but also trade is a tool for bringing up domestic, more competitiveness for the European Union. And one way to do it is to engage, as I mentioned, with more partnerships, with more like-minded countries, and not just between the EU and the US, but also extended to other regions in the world.
Thank you. Bernd Lang, 30 seconds.
I spent a long time and a long share of my lifetime in the TTIP negotiation, and the experience of that is we should really look to the challenge of the future, standards of the future, the question how to tackle climate change. So there is a lot of opportunities to work together, perhaps not regarding the competition of standards and competition of the past.
TTIP, remember that. Matthias, over to you, 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I think the key message I would bring is that the EU-US trade investment relationship is so important for economic reasons, but also for geopolitical reasons. In an uncertain time with tectonic shifts, there's a lot of possibilities to improve it, and either side should be really careful before taking steps which might destabilize it.
Noted. Thank you. Bertram, and then Tiffany. Bertram, 30 seconds.
In an unstable world, close ties between the US and Europe are of utmost importance. Beyond this, is the US the most important export market for my industry? It will keep its crucial importance for the years to come. New tariffs are counterproductive for business, for the industry, as well as for consumers, and we sincerely hope that policymakers come to the same conclusions and act in accordance. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertram. Tiffany, last word, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think this was a great discussion, and I think the thing to keep in mind is that the U.S. and the EU both are trying to compete against China. It is the challenge of our day, and we aren't competing just in our own markets, but globally. And the U.S. and the EU aligned and working together and in this competition are going to be much more successful than if we're scuffling back and forth with one another over less grand scale issues. So I hope that we can keep our eye on that ball.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panel, Matthias, Bernd, Tiffany, Renata, and Bertram. Also, thank you to our team in Brussels that you can't see, Anna, who organized all of this, and Zora and Pablo, all the events team and the social media team as well, and to VDMA for supporting the program today. We really appreciate that. So for me in Washington, D.C., we're off to start our day, and you're starting to wrap up in Brussels and across Europe. There's a lot happening in the next 3 weeks. The whole future of the planet is in the hands of one or two people currently. And I'm off to Philadelphia to hear what Republicans against Trump have to say. So I wish you a good day. Take care.